The Disappearing Neighbor. Chapter 1. A New Face on Elm Street. I stepped out of my car and took a deep breath, surveying the modest apartment building before me. It had been months since my last breakup, and finally, I was moving on to a new chapter of my life. Literally. As I approached the front door with my suitcase in tow, it swung open, revealing an elderly man standing there with a warm smile. "Welcome home, young lady. You must be Sarah." His voice was deep and gentle, his silver hair neatly combed back. He introduced himself as Mr. Jenkins. Over the next few weeks, our interactions were limited yet friendly, exchanging pleasantries during our daily walks to fetch newspapers or lending a helping hand with groceries. It was an amicable coexistence that soothed my frayed nerves after the recent turmoil. But one day, I noticed his routine had changed. Jenkins would venture out at odd hours, sometimes returning home before dawn. Intrigue peaked within me. One morning, upon returning from work, a peculiar assortment of items lay on my doorstep. A dusty totem pole, an antique locket with photographs inside, and a leather-bound journal. The latter caught my attention as it was closed, but had no visible lock. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through his living room window. Mr. Jenkins stood in the middle of the dimly lit space, studying one of those journals intently. Avoiding direct eye contact became his habit, making me wonder if he sensed my gaze. Days passed, with more items appearing. A vintage doll, an old key, and a small wooden box adorned with strange symbols. One evening, as dusk enveloped the neighborhood, I caught a fleeting glimpse of him entering his house with a flashlight in hand. My curiosity propelled me toward the adjacent wall. It was papered thin to his living room. Intrigue turned to suspicion when I discovered a hidden room behind the drywall during a late night stroll outside. Dust coated everything. An old desk occupied the center, surrounded by faded photographs of children. Each picture showed a smiling child, some with an unsettling intensity in their gaze. A chill ran down my spine as I recalled local whispers about missing youngsters decades ago. The wall surface was recently renovated, his secrets spilled into plain sight. My mind wrestled between unease and the absurdity of it all. Was Mr. Jenkins involved? Or was paranoia fueled by a fragile heart still reeling from love lost? That night, as I retreated to bed, I couldn't shake off the feeling something was amiss. A faint clatter outside drew my attention, an unmistakable thud followed by silence. I peeked through the wall once more. His door was ajar, beckoning me forward. Heart racing, I pushed it open. Inside, he sat hunched over his desk amidst the musty air and flickering light of one lone lamp. He looked up as if sensing my presence. Our eyes met for an instant before he concealed the journal behind his back. "Sarah, just unpacking," he said with a gruff tone, gesturing toward the scattered boxes. I retreated without further inquiry, unsure how to confront the unsettling encounter. The next morning, Jenkins was gone. His car sat idle in the driveway, parked and covered by overgrown bushes. As days turned into weeks, my focus shifted back to work and settling into this new life. But oddities persisted. More mysterious deliveries left on my doorstep, an antique doll with vacant eyes staring at me through a glassy gaze. Jenkins' enigmatic presence lingered like an unseen shadow. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Night. As the days blurred together, I began to note strange occurrences. Jenkins would vanish in the dead of night or appear unexpectedly during broad daylight. avoiding direct contact when passing each other on the sidewalk. It was as if we were two worlds apart despite living mere feet away. His nocturnal habits and cryptic gifts continued. One evening, around midnight, I ventured out to my back porch with a flashlight, hoping for answers. My gaze locked on a Jenkins house. Lights flickered within, casting eerie silhouettes across the curtains. A trunk appeared on his porch, ornate, old-fashioned, adorned with arcane markings. Curiosity urged me to investigate further. I approached cautiously, and in the beam of my light, I saw him lugging it into his living room. My pulse quickened. Jenkins was never around at night unless he had a window open or curtains ajar. The door creaked as I entered. An air of aged books and stale air enveloped me. Flickering candles illuminated the space. His eyes narrowed upon entering, but he uttered not a word. Shelves upon shelves lined the room, tomes bound in worn leather that seemed to whisper tales from forgotten times. A black trunk sat atop a wooden table near the center, adorned with locks and strange symbols matching the objects on my doorstep. A childhood book caught his eye, and we exchanged brief pleasantries about it. As I turned toward the door, I noticed it too late. He'd locked it behind me. "You shouldn't have come here," his voice echoed through the room, resonating with an edge of malice that startled me. "You can't handle what I am." The words lingered long after I exited into the balmy night, skin prickling under goosebumps. It wasn't until morning that reality began to warp. A child's doll lay on my doorstep, porcelain pale, blue-eyed, staring up at me with an unsettling grin. Neighboring concerns heightened when Mrs. Rodriguez shared her grandson's encounters with an elderly man in the shadows around the time of local children going missing decades ago. It was mere hearsay, but a chilling echo of long, that buried fears resurfaced. Determined to unravel the mystery, I confronted Mr. Jenkins. "What are you doing here?" he asked from behind thick-rimmed glasses as I stood before him, his eyes clouded with suspicion. "I know what's happening," I blurted. His laughter was a dry rattle that sent shivers down my spine. "Sarah, the world isn't always kind. Sometimes one must disappear to protect innocence." He vanished behind me. I spun around as he reappeared in front of me, his hand clamping over my mouth and nose until I fainted. When consciousness returned, my neighbor, Mark, held an arm under me, his voice echoing through the room. "Girl, what happened? You've been out cold for hours." Outside, it was dawn. Inside, he'd vanished, taking the trunk with him. Chapter 3. The Silent House. Mark and I pored over Mr. Jenkins' history. Inexplicable disappearances dated back to the 1960s. All boys around 7 years old from our neighborhood. The room behind the wall was a testament to his dark past. I'd unearthed his sinister legend online. A knock at my door interrupted research. Officers flanked me, their faces somber. Sarah Miller? They confirmed every parent's worst nightmare. Mr. Jenkins had fled 40.6 years ago, implicated in unsolved abductions. I entered the house, not knowing what to expect. He sat on a worn armchair. Shadows danced across him as he spoke of protection and innocence, his hands stained with blood. I buried the memories deep. A sudden gust blew open his jacket, revealing a collar of children's photographs. Victims, or something worse? I stared upon a monster from another era, trapped in our time. Cuffs bound my wrists behind me while they read him his rights, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He spoke of those he protected as the officers carried him out, an echo of an eternal truth. Some truths are better left buried. In a cell, I confront this man and unravel the riddle of his shadowy past. A chill swept through me when they mentioned how he vanished during questioning, never to be seen again. That night, in the dark, Mark whispered, "Run." A scream ripped from my throat as the door clanged shut behind us. The walls hid Mr. Jenkins no more. I'd face his darkness and unravel the enigma surrounding him. I pried open the cell door with a broken chair leg, stumbling into an eerie room where he sat by candlelight. "Sarah Miller," he rasped, his eyes glowing in the dim light. "Not of this world." He beckoned me to sit beside the trunk. With hesitant steps, I approached, recognizing its locks from artifacts online, relics of ritual and myth. As a young girl, he'd been accused. They buried him in that room for the crimes of the past. My voice caught as the last lock opened with an unseen force. Inside lay his dark history and proof of innocent souls protected under his care. In those shadows, I found solace, protection from his crimes, and a chance to right old wrongs. In the light of day, they found him dead, another legend buried too deep. Yet in that cell, something awakened. I escaped with 2 doors behind me now open, his past, the truth, and my path. And so we fled together, bound for redemption in an uncharted realm.